Welcome everyone to the next edition of the DFS Down Under show with Smatho and Hef, presented by Daily Fantasy Rankings. It's the finals week 1. We're back for the second episode to break down Saturday AFL Daily Fantasy. Hef, thanks for joining me on this second episode of the week.
No worries, mate. I look forward to the big check coming next Monday.
Yes, you did some hard work on the previous night.
I needed to get back my money I lost to the Cats last night.
Yes, you were very boyish, very boyish. But obviously, if they kick straight, you might have been a chance. But
I don't know. It's footy, isn't it?
That is footy. Mate, we're going to be covering the two games on Saturday for Draft Stars and for DraftKings. But before we get into the footy, obviously, Spring Carnival is gearing up. We're into October now. This is when the big races are coming up, and obviously the action is always happening on Australia's favourite tournament betting site, SportChamps. Huge contest has been posted in the lobby yesterday, which is the featured $50,000 Group 1 Spring Special, $20 entry, 20% payout, takes all the Group 1 races all the way up to the end of the Flemington Carnival. Hef, this is your wheelhouse. As always, you've given me a couple of good selections here. What are you thinking for this Saturday's racing?
Well, we're going to go with the main race because that's what everyone loves. So in the Turnbull, I'm going to go with Master of Wine each way. I think this shapes as a really big player looking towards a race like the Derby, and I think you'll go 2 for 2 tomorrow.
So make sure you get onto sportchamps.com.au. Make sure if you're on Daily Fantasy Rankings, make sure you put your username in your profile so you make sure you get DFR ranking points, because you just never know. Those ranking points can be beneficial to your ranking on the leaderboard. And make sure you join the $5 contest, which is at 7,500, which is a pretty good contest if you only just want to chuck in a couple of bucks for the day. Great payouts and great times on SportChamps. Now, let's get on to Daily Fantasy AFL. We're going to start here with the two-game slate here on Saturday. First game we're going to look at is the St Kilda at $2.15 and the Western Bulldogs are at $1.71. The spread's 4.5 and the total's 123.5. And then shortly after that is the game over at the West Coast, $1.45, taking on Collingwood, or the Outsiders, at $2.75 with a 12.5 spread and 109.5 total. If you're on Draft Stars, you'll be able to play the two-game $75,000 GPP feature. DraftKings also have a two-game slate, which is at $4,000. Now, we are recording just before teams on Friday afternoon, so I can see that Eagles going to bring a stack of players, including Jamie Cripps, Jeremy McGovern, Luke Shuey, Josh Kennedy, Lewis Jetta maybe, and Jack Redden back into the side. So we're not quite sure who's going to be leaving that particular team, so make sure you check out the teams on the league's website. For the Pies, Tom Phillips could return after his hamstring strain. He's been out for a couple of weeks. Zach Jones should return from his hamstring for the Saints, and Aaron Norton would have been over his head knock from a couple of weeks ago. As always, our free tools on the Daily Fantasy Rankings website will show a couple of good avenues to attack on this particular slate. First of all, you've got to play backs against the Pies. They're number 1 in fantasy points leaked in this position all season long. And then also you can target the rucks of the Bulldogs, with poor old Timmy English giving up a stack of fantasy points in that position as well. And if you're looking at the total fantasy points, both Collingwood and the Western Bulldogs are 1 and 2 for total team stats accumulated across the season. So, mate, we don't really do much two-game slates. We've always been the single contest. So you've got a few players to get stuck into for this one. So what are your initial thoughts for this two-game slate?
Initial thoughts on the game, I think West Coast are going to be pretty popular. St Kilda and Bulldogs, that's a hard one to pick. Two contrasting styles there. I think everyone will just sort of gravitate to the Eagles. A couple of those guys are priced down a little bit coming back from injury. We're a little bit worried that the Eagles are having so many players come back from not having played in recent weeks. That's a little bit worrying. Collingwood, as bad or as plain as they may have been going Collingwood, they always seem to turn up for these these big interstate games. So I don't think it's a fait accompli that the Eagles get there, but I'm hoping they do.
All right. Let's break down this 2-game slate by starting, as always, in the rucks. And as I mentioned earlier, look, you can target the Bulldogs against Timmy English, who's currently at 12K, which is not too bad of a price. But I think Draft Stars have caught on to this as well, and they've priced up Marshall at 14K and Paddy Ryder at 10,950, which is pretty much one of their peak prices for the year. Peach of a matchup. And then obviously for the West Coast, you have Nick Naitanui around that 12K as well. And just to top things off, we've got Brodie Grundy on the slate, who's at 15.6. So all these rucks do have their pros and cons. Is there anyone that you're looking particular here?
Well, what are the cons for Paddy Ryder? I think he's perfectly suited here against English. I suppose the con for Ryder is how much they can run with Marshall in the ruck. They're really playing a bit of a split with these two. The last game St Kilda played, Ryder got off to a flyer in the first half, but then it was up to Marshall, who rucked seemingly predominantly the second half there, and he really boosted his score. I think Ryder is the better play given the price. Marshall's pretty expensive there at the 14K, but I think you can play him as well, just given because he's against English, and the fact that the Bulldogs do give up points to forwards as well. So while he's playing up forward, Marshall, he can take a grab and kick a goal, and he's quite a good tackler as well. So I think I've got Paddy Ryder at 1. I've got Marshall at 2, and the thing about, especially Paddy in particular, you can play them both as a forward. So if you're struggling for forward options, keep that in mind. Look at West Coast and Collingwood. West Coast they're Brodie Grundy's bogey side, really. Naitanui kept him to 62 earlier in the year when West Coast flogged Collingwood. I don't expect him to be that low this game, but given that 15,000 price tag, I don't think there's huge upside in Grundy. And Natanui's really starting to work up to that, up in price. He's up over 12,000 now. I'm a little bit worried that his upside's a bit capped there, going up against Grundy, who, even though he hasn't had the greatest year by his standards, Grundy, he still isn't giving up many points to the opposition rucks. So I'm really a big fan of the two St Kilda rucks here.
Yeah, I tend to agree there. Great matchup. Maybe if you're being contrarian, maybe English to run it back, but you can almost, as I said, you can almost run both of them against this Bulldogs side. Let's move on to the defence, and as I mentioned, Collingwood backs give up a lot of fantasy scoring, so should we just keep it single and, find a couple of pairs of Eagles to run your back line? Like Hearn and Shepherd, or even Nelson and Cole, I look pretty standout options there. But what do you think about that to start with?
Well, to start with, I think we've got to be a little bit wary with a couple of these Eagles backs. One that comes to mind is Liam Duggan, who has been sort of filling in the midfield the last couple of weeks. And as a result, his price has gone up considerably. I think he's looking there, he's up over 13,000, which seems unheard of for Liam Duggan. So don't get lured into those high scores, because I think you'll resume more of a traditional halfback role. I think that might have a flow-on effect with Jackson Nelson as well, who has seemed to take more of a ball-winning role as they're trying to fill a team, basically, the Eagles, with all their injuries. So 11,000 for Nelson. If you told me at the start of the year it'd be 11,000, I would have said I'm never doing this show with you ever again, Smatho. But that's what we're dealing with here. So I prefer to be with Hearn. Shepherd has been most consistent, so he sort of fits the bill there too. But finals footy, I think you can also look at Collingwood. Obviously, you can look at all the teams, but Collingwood, I wouldn't snooze on them. West Coast they have given up points to backs in particular games, and if Collingwood's going to try and maybe take the wind out of the game and chip the ball around the back line, which we know they can do, even though they're massive underdogs, Collingwood, I think you can really look at even a Collingwood stack as they try and control the ball and take the crowd out of the game. I think that's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, that was my next point. We've got pie options such as Quain. Well, like Quainer and Roughhead, they're the ones I was going to ask to run it back with a bit of value, because they're both under around the under 10k, and then obviously if you want to go a little bit higher, you've got Noble and Crisp, Maynard, things like that. So, but in the end, there's not really that much premium options. Like we don't have the Lloyds of the slate. You know, this is possibly a bit of value, and hopefully they pop.
It's a bit like that. I think it's important to consider linking your backs, especially as you get into sort of these multi-game slates, even though it's a 2-game slate. But you can look at, well, Crisp is really, really well priced up there, but you can look at using a couple of Collingwood defenders and maybe a couple of those midfielders who like to get involved with chipping the ball around down back. If you're going to take that sort of angle with the lineup, I'd probably tend to. I'm not as big on the Western Bulldogs backs here. St Kilda have generally been pretty hard to get at. They don't like to give up points to the opposition in the back line like West Coast and Collingwood seem to be happy to do at certain times. So we're probably lowest on the Bulldogs backs of the 4 teams we've got to work with.
Yeah, it's quite evident on the rankings cheat sheets where you see a lot of Collingwood and West Coast options in the projected, and then if you click the value button, there's a lot of those as well popping. So, I reckon that second game will be more popular for defenders. And so in the midfielders, though, we got a little bit of this the other night on Thursday night. There wasn't much value in the midfield, so you had to pay up. Again, this is all just premium stuff here, so there's a severe lack of value options. Even if we get a surprise in team selection, I don't think we will. It's going to be a bit of a struggle to pick 3 of these guys to squeeze in, or should we try and make it work?
Yeah, I think you probably have to spend that. We don't have any ruck options really, so we need to save cash somewhere. I assume we're probably going to do that in our forward line again. The thing I was noticed looking at the stats is that all 4 of these teams are quite good at restricting contested ball, but they do give up a bit of they give up more uncontested ball, and contested ball is what I'm trying to spit out. And then on the flip side, they do like to control the ball as well. We know the Eagles love to control the ball. We know Collingwood loves to control the ball. And the Bulldogs, they've got some very good runners on the outside as well. The flip side of that is we saw what happened last night. It's finals footy. It's more of a contested brand than what we're used to during the regular season. So what gains we might have seen through the year in uncontested footy, I don't know if we should fall too much into that data given what we know about finals footy. So that's a nice confusing start to this little segment. But.
All right, so who are the players then, if it's contested and going to be rigid tacklers, etc., like name a couple from each side that we could possibly choose from.
Well, I want to go with Gaff for starters. I just like the fact that he's just going to be everywhere. He's such a good runner. We've seen how he's taken up the slack with the Eagles midfielders away through injury. With guys like Sheed, Redden's coming back, they all are quite dependent on what role they get when we've got all these midfielders in. But Gaff seems to be the constant that he can get his points no matter what the makeup of the team is. Now, if all those Eagles midfielders don't get up, so if Shuey doesn't get up or Redden for starters, I think that really opens up the West Coast midfield because obviously Yo isn't there. So if there's one more that doesn't get up, then I'm really keen to play West Coast mids. To look at Collingwood mids, I think the obvious is Taylor Adams again, who's just born for finals footy with that inside role that he plays. So he would be my top pick there for Collingwood. If we go and have a look over at St Kilda and the Bulldogs, these are 2 teams which both restrict points to midfielders pretty strongly through the year on the data, and I see no real reason to go against that here. So I'd lean to the other game, but if we're going to look at Saints, they played against each other in round 2, these teams. So it's a long time ago to take too much from that contest, but the Saints really dominated the midfield there through the likes of Billings, Jones, Steele, and Seb Ross, which obviously a long time ago Seb Ross had 100. Mm-hmm. They're very good inside St Kilda, so I'm still probably leaning Bulldogs. My favourite players there would be Hunter, maybe Bailey Smith, more so than the noted inside players in Bontempelli and McRae.
I've just noticed that Tom Liberatore, who was around that 9-10,000 all year, he found himself at 13,000 this week.
Yeah.
I mean, this is his type game style here. 113, 198 in his last two games. Like, the price has caught up, but he'll be a good player to own if he can get to him.
He can be popular there, especially with these teams getting players back from injury. It sort of reduces the real cheap guys that we've got to work with. So going a little bit below the top liners is going to be important to pick the right ones to try and fit all these players into your lineups. And so Liberatore is probably going to be really popular on that basis. But like I said, even though it's finals footy, I'm always scared playing inside mids against the Saints. On the flip side, I'm very happy to play Steele for them. He's just going to be in everything, and he's got to be one of the most consistent midfielders of the year.
Very good. All right, let's find some value then in the forward line. Look, you probably, as we saw with Motlop the other night, you probably need a forward that just pops up and kicks 3 or 4 goals, because none of these guys are going to be hitting ceiling scores in this particular matchup. I'm thinking like players such as Norton or King or even Kennedy, Josh Allen. They can all bust your side, but they can also hit that 70 plus to take you to a lovely lineup. Do you share that sentiment, or do we try and play it safe here?
I do. They seem forwards this year really seems the volatile position. We can get the cheaper players in there, and you really want to, especially if you're going to play safer with the rest of your lineup. We know what we're getting from if we're going to spend up on midfielders. We know what we're getting from defenders. Seem to be pretty consistent this year. The way the game style's sort of gone. So even though these forwards can, Norton's a great example. He can get you 20 or he can get you 70, and at 7,000. You don't want to be piling into these guys, but you've got to have exposure to a range of them and hope that you've got the right one that pops. Like you say, Motlop last night bobbed up. He was only 7,000, and that could be the point of difference to get your team across. So my favourite ones here, I think we've got to look at St Kilda forwards. It's been a bit of a theme all year with the Bulldogs. They do give up points to opposition forwards. So Membry's a guy who has that sort of higher ceiling that I'm always sort of half interested in looking at. So he's sub 10K, so he's definitely in play for me. Max King is a guy that just threatens to tear games apart. He's being a key forward, he's not going to get a lot of the ball, but like you say, if he can go off for 4 goals here against the Dogs at 7,000, then he's a point of difference for you there too. In terms of the West Coast Collingwood game, one point I wanted to note here was since De Goey has been back in the side, he hasn't been in the centre bounces. So he's been back for 2 weeks, I'm pretty sure. Mm-hmm. I thought he may return to that centre bounce role, which he played a bit of during the early rounds. In fact, his first 5 rounds, he was 40% plus in every game. So they're almost using him in that sort of Jake Stringer style start in the middle and then push forward. Interesting that hasn't happened since his return. And Jamie Elliott, who has taken that role throughout the year, he held on to that role with De Goey back. He's had 80 and 65% in the last couple of games. So if you're enjoying playing Elliott, I wouldn't be too disturbed with De Goey's presence being back in the team. But I think you're also paying for that role now with Elliott. He's not getting under anyone's guard anymore. Up at that 11,000 mark. A guy like Stevenson, who
I was just going to mention here, there could be the smoky. I mean, he's got to get picked first. Play. Yeah, he's got to get picked first. But 9,000, geez, that's the ultimate ride or die play there.
Yeah, and it seems a good time to mention my old long-standing theory with West Coast is that there's always a guy. I'm trying to say it without being too disparaging. There's always a guy who isn't noted for being any sort of superstar footballer that bobs up and kicks goals against them. My theory is it's got something to do with their defensive setup. We know they take a lot of risks and they're all covering for each other. So a guy like Brody Mychek at 9,000, I'm pretty sure he's kicked goals against them before. He fits the mould of that taller goal-kicking player that when they get out, when you beat West Coast, you get them out the back. When they all press up, you get them out the back, and there's a bit of space to work with. And I think Mychek's definitely the guy that can capitalise on that. So my favourite forward player is probably Paddy Ryder. If you don't want to play him in the ruck, I think he's really well priced and he's got a really great floor. So if I'm going to play Paddy Ryder, I definitely want to go with a really volatile, low-owned guy at my second forward position, and that's where I'll be looking to save money.
All right. So in summary, pay up for the mids. You've got to try and pick a nice ruckman and then try and save a bit of money in both the defence and the forward line. Sounds simple.
I think so, and I think I want to target the West Coast Collingwood game out of the two. I think... Well, if I had to guess, if I had to guess that a stack was going to win, I would guess it would come from that game, and I wouldn't write off the chances of Collingwood stack, even if they don't happen to win the game, because we've seen it happen before. There's been a couple of games in Adelaide, I think, where they've just gone and they've taken the air out of the crowd. Now the ball early on and just chip. So if you're that way inclined, pick a lineup to take advantage of that type of style of game.
Excellent. All right, we'll wrap things up here for this special edition for finals weekend, Saturday edition of the DFR DFS Down Under show. Hef and I will be back probably next Thursday night to break down the semi-final week. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel as always. dailyfantasyrankings.com.au is our website for all your AFL daily fantasy tools. A big weekend. We've got the rugby league starting as well, so make sure you keep an eye on our website at all times. Hef, your overtime is now done. Good luck on the track tomorrow. We'd like to see we get a bit of a bank for these big races coming up. Thanks for joining me today, mate.
No worries. I'll go spend my check on a Jack Jumpers Foundation membership.
Yes. What? And the merchandise are out too. There's some quality merchandise there, so let me add it. All right, thanks for that, and we'll catch you next time on the DFR Down Under show. Thanks, Hef.
See you, mate.
Cheers.